What does this even mean? A special delivery letter suddenly arrived. I started living alone due to my posting without my family, but this is the first time something like this has arrived. I checked the sender. It was from my husband, but I was bewildered because it was so sudden. It's true that he had been neglecting to contact me because he was busy with work, but to suddenly contact me by mail. Since he used special delivery, there must be some urgent matter. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with green lines, signed in familiar handwriting, and with a summer seal affixed to it. I thought I might be seeing things, and I traced the written characters with my finger over and over again. It was, without a doubt, a completed divorce registration form. My hands wouldn't stop shaking from the shock. I hurriedly called my husband. "Hello, what's going on? Why would you send me a divorce registration form out of the blue?" "It's just as it looks. Let's get a divorce. You can file it right away." "Wait, aren't we still in mediation? Has our son been told about this?" My voice unintentionally grew louder. But in contrast to me, my husband's voice was listless, which was evident even through the phone. "Our son also wants us to get a divorce. He's been neglected for so long, there's no way he'd be attached to you." His tone and laughter were frivolous and insulting to me, who had been seriously trying to mediate. It seemed he had no intention of discussing things further. "Okay then, I'll take care of the rest." My husband laughed, satisfied with my answer. With this, I can finally be free from my husband. It had been a long separated life, but at last I'm free from the pain. This is for the best, isn't it? I had been living with my true feelings hidden for so long. My son and my ex-husband were probably doing the same. Finally, I'm free from a loveless family. I quickly filled out the divorce registration form. I was free from all the discussions about property division, child support, and living expenses that we had been mediating. The next day, I submitted the divorce registration form, and on the way back, I completed the procedures to sell our house. If the house didn't sell, I decided I'd have it demolished and turn it into an empty lot. My name is Rachel, a 48-year-old woman who has been a full-time homemaker and part-time worker for 18 years. I married my husband Sam at the age of 28 after a workplace romance. I then had our son Ken at the age of 30. I was a workaholic and had no intention of getting married. The fact that I was able to get married at all was a miracle. I still remember how my parents cried tears of joy when I told them about my marriage. I had almost no romantic experience since my school days, and during college, my life consisted only of going back and forth between the research lab and my home. I spent my college years studying and researching with the goal of joining my current company. Thanks to those efforts, I am currently affiliated with the research lab of a well-known corporation. My husband, in contrast to me, was a gentleman who took the initiative in raising our son. Normally, I, as the mother, should have been the one to participate in our son's school events, but my husband would bow his head to the lab director and take paid leave to attend. Honestly, I was extremely grateful. Since our son was little, he has been more attached to my husband than to me, his mother. Of course, my son is the apple of my eye. I thought I had poured all my love into him. We took turns fairly picking him up and dropping him off at kindergarten. Nevertheless, when I came to pick him up, my son would look dissatisfied. It was hard to accept the fact that my son wasn't attached to me. It's true that I'm making my son feel lonelier than mothers in ordinary households. I made up my mind that once the project I was currently working on was finished, I would shower him with more love than my husband. One day, my husband and I were called in by the lab director. I figured it was probably because I had been taking too much childcare leave. I want Rachel to take the lead on this new project. I know her child is still young, so I was told to ask Sam to cover for her. My husband had submitted a transfer request without telling me. I'm going to leave research and focus on raising our son. I thought that was a good idea too. That way I can take more time off. From then on, my days remained as busy as ever. My husband also started to get used to his new position as an office worker. However, I had less time off than before. There were times when I cried in the lab when my husband and son sent me pictures of them enjoying their holidays while I was at work. The distance between my son and me grew even wider. Dad and I went to the amusement park. Next time I should come too. Oh, yeah. My son awkwardly responded. It seems like my husband always intervened whenever I tried to talk to my son, maybe because I was so busy. I wondered what I could do as my son's mother. My son turned 10 years old. I told him I took a day off for his birthday. My son's smile seemed strained. I felt like he didn't want me to take the day off. Mom's busy, right? You didn't have to take a day off. What are you talking about? Your dad booked a reservation at the steakhouse for us, for 3 people. What would you have done if I couldn't take the day off? My son's eyes widened. I noticed something was off. Could it be that the person he was going with wasn't me? My son hesitantly confessed. There's been someone helping out with the housework at home instead of Mom. My husband had been regularly bringing his mistress to our house, and my son was accepting it. I couldn't forgive this. It seemed like he had planned to celebrate my son's birthday with his mistress too. I was angry and wanted to confront my husband, but my son stopped me. Ever since Dad quit research, he's been acting strange. I couldn't tell you, Mom, but Dad said he's happier with Amanda. I feel the same way. I shook my head at my son's plea. I can't allow him to cheat in front of our elementary school-aged son. Listen, Amanda might be a nice and wonderful person, but I don't really like her. That kind of relationship is wrong. My son looked conflicted. It must have been very stressful for him. My husband and his mistress were openly interacting with my son. He couldn't tell me about it. He had been placed in such an environment. I had noticed my husband's affair and had created this situation. I had nothing but regrets. The next day, I hired a private investigator to look into my husband's affair. It would be bad for my son's upbringing, too. I'll put a stop to it by showing him the evidence. That way, my son won't have to pretend he doesn't know. And I can't let my son get any closer to the mistress. I decided to resolve everything before that happened. A week later, photos proving my husband's affair were delivered to the lab. The way he confidently entered our house with her, she didn't seem like a mistress. But unfortunately, the project hit a roadblock. For about a week after that, I couldn't go home. During that time, it seems my husband had his mistress stay over at our house the whole time. It seems my son's birthday was celebrated with the mistress at the steakhouse as planned. Evidence photos and videos were sent to my phone. The three of them looked like a real family. My son, who is the spitting image of his father, doesn't resemble the mistress, but if someone told me they were a real family, I wouldn't find it strange. They looked that happy eating together. My heart ached at my son's smile. A picture-perfect family. No one would ever guess that the woman embracing my son as he blew out the candles on his birthday cake was his father's mistress. After looking at the photos, I played the video. The first thing I heard in the video made me feel sick and I covered my mouth. Thanks for today, Mom. My son was calling the mistress Mom. I couldn't accept that. I got goosebumps from a physiological sense of disgust. I decided to believe that my son was being forced by the mistress to call her that. My heart rate increased and I found it hard to breathe. I stopped the video and took a deep breath, and I told myself that my husband was the one at fault. I played the video again. It seems my son calls the mistress Mom on a regular basis, and surprisingly, he's more attached to her than to his own father. Actually, there's something I need to talk to Sam about. The other day, Ken apparently told Rachel about me. My husband looked dumbfounded, his mouth agape. He was being told that his affair had been discovered. It was a natural reaction. So what did Rachel say? She said that the relationship between a father and a mom is wrong. The video focused on my husband the whole time, but my son's voice was clearly displeased. If Dad says he's going to get a divorce, I think she'll definitely hate me. My son's feelings had completely shifted away from me. I know how much I love him. I understand that I haven't been able to give him enough love because I've been so busy. I know that's why my son has become like this, but I can't forgive my husband's infidelity. The lab director approached my desk and picked up the evidence photos of the affair. Is this why he requested a transfer? My husband used to be passionate about research. He requested a transfer for the sake of his son. The lab director had felt something was off about that. He said it was for his adorable son, but I knew it. Even if you get divorced now, it will be difficult for you to raise Ken alone. Maybe you should have given up on marriage and children when you became a researcher. The lab director patted me on the shoulder. I've been through a divorce too. What's more, my ex-husband took custody of our child. It's not a profession suited for raising children, but if you're going to get divorced, I'll support you. A few days later, my husband told me about the affair. I'm sorry. I cheated. I'm sure Ken told you a lot of things. Oh, that. He apologized so casually. I was driven by anxiety, wondering if I had to agree to a divorce. I pretended to be an understanding wife, but inside my heart was far from calm, and I was furious. If I did anything wrong, my husband might take custody of our son. I had to avoid that at all costs. You're not mad? We've been drifting apart. It's only natural to have an affair or two. But my husband and his mistress never broke up. They didn't even try to distance themselves, even temporarily. Instead, my husband started inviting his mistress to our house while I was staying at the lab. She occupied our house as if she were the wife. My son and the mistress were living their daily lives there as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My son had grown so attached to the mistress that I couldn't bring myself to strongly tell him to stop. Every time I left the house, the mistress would casually come in. I couldn't hide my irritation at her audacity. I reported everything to my husband's department. While his wife is away, he brings his mistress to their house. This kind of infidelity became known throughout the company. It wouldn't just end with being looked down upon. My husband was given a significant pay cut, but he declared that he would continue his relationship with his mistress and started preparing to voluntarily resign. I wondered if he had any intention of divorcing me. I decided to ask him, "What are you going to do? The company found out about your affair. It can't be helped. It's all true." My husband was clearly exhausted, but it seemed he didn't think I was the one who reported him. Our company is full of brown-nosing, jealousy, and backstabbing. So my husband probably didn't even dream that I was the one who reported him. I worked a regular shift with no overtime. I even took paternity leave and got bonuses. I guess I became the kind of guy people are jealous of. My husband chose to voluntarily resign and become a stay-at-home dad without breaking up with me or his mistress. My son was completely attached to the mistress. I was irritated by my husband's non-committal attitude. I watched the videos sent by the private investigators again and again. Each time I became more and more unsure of how I should approach my son. What should I do? I was constantly worried, but a turning point arrived for me too. I transferred to a research lab in downtown New York City. When I heard about it from the lab director, I accepted without hesitation. There was no reason to refuse. The lab director said with a laugh, "I heard that Sam became a stay-at-home dad. Now you can focus on your research without worry. So go to New York City and let your talent blossom." It takes an hour and a half one way to get to downtown. I was also starting to find it bothersome to go back home. It was perfect timing. That evening, I told my husband and son during dinner, so I might be transferred to our lab in New York City. My son's eyes widened. His expression seemed to show delight. "That's great. The lab in New York City, right?" My husband exclaimed loudly, surprised. He was happy for me as if it were his own accomplishment. It seems that even though he left the lab, he's still a researcher at heart. My surprised son, seemingly not fully understanding, also praised me, influenced by his father's reaction. "Mom, you're amazing. It really is amazing. She's at the top level in our company." Seeing their reactions, I brought up the main point. It'll be tough to commute to the lab in New York City time-wise, right? I'm thinking of renting an apartment in the city. I've been looking into it. My husband and son exchanged glances. It was the expected reaction. It seems I'm nothing but a nuisance in this house. Don't worry about me, and about Dad too. My move to New York City was decided, without any objections from my husband or son. It was obvious that they were thinking that they could now openly live with Sam's mistress at home. On the day I was sent off, they said words that were clearly lip service. "I'll be lonely with you not at home, Mom." "I know, right? I'll come back on my days off." I gave my son the answer he wanted to hear. "I'll have to get used to the lab in New York City, so I probably won't be able to come back for a while." My son's lips slightly curled up into a smirk. I didn't miss that. "I'll miss you, but do your best at work." 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Sometimes, living alone in my apartment in the city, I even forget that I have a family. Maybe this is who I really am. Maybe my life with a family was the fake one, a world I made up in my delusions. I started to think that more and more. This was because my husband has stopped contacting me. The last time he contacted me was to send me a photo of my son's middle school entrance ceremony. There has been no word from him since. I noticed that the person next to my son in the photo had been unnaturally cropped out. It was easy to imagine that his mistress had been standing there. One day I received a call from my son. Is something urgent? That's how rare it was for my son to contact me. Hesitantly, I pressed the call button. "Hello, Ken?" I heard a rustling sound. Maybe he accidentally pressed the call button. I was about to press the end call button. Then I heard a woman's voice. It was definitely the mistress's voice, and I braced myself. It seemed the mistress had something to talk to me about. "Hello, is this Mrs. Davis?" It seemed that my son had pestered her into contacting me. "Ken wants a new mother, you see. He's been coming to me for advice, saying that his mom and dad are never going to get a divorce. I'm in no position to say anything because I'm the one having an affair." I told him that, but he just wouldn't listen. "Ken, are you listening? Your mom hasn't been coming home at all. But it's a problem between your parents, so I'll talk to your dad about it later." Honestly, I didn't think my husband would ever bring up divorce. My son probably realized that too, but I don't understand why he wants me and my husband to get a divorce. Does he want his father to remarry his mistress that badly? I talked to my husband that same day. My husband was flustered by my son's coercion, but he soon regained his composure and explained that he had been with his mistress for many years and that my son was attached to her. He's been attached to her since he was in elementary school, so he doesn't think of her as his dad's mistress, because you were always working. I was thinking about leaving my husband and letting him take our son. Then my husband brought up the word divorce. I want to discuss divorce as an option. I'll take custody of Ken. That's decided, right? Well, about that, I couldn't help but hesitate. I had been cheated on by my husband for many years, but it's true that I had neglected my family and my son because I prioritized work. But now that it's come to this, I wondered if there weren't other causes. Can I really let go of my son? Hey, Rachel, what's wrong? You of all people, I'm sorry. I was just spacing out. Then my son, who had apparently been listening to my conversation with my husband, started yelling. You've been neglecting your son for years, and now you're saying you want custody? My son's cold words. Hearing that, my husband panicked. Hey, Ken! The affair, I admit that I'm the cause of it. Accept my father's conditions for divorce. My son made a loud crashing sound, probably from hitting something in his frustration. My husband's voice echoed repeatedly, shouting his son's name. I listened to their conversation, but my son was in a rebellious phase and wouldn't listen to his father at all. I'm the one who's been taking care of Ken. Let me take care of him. That's my condition for the divorce. My issue was with my husband and his mistress's relationship. He was openly showing his infidelity to our son, and now my husband wants to take custody of our son and continue living with him. That's what bothered me. Am I being too prudish? I finally managed to speak. My only card to play. Do you think that a father who isn't working, lives with his mistress, and relies on his estranged wife for living expenses can have custody of his son? Ken is old enough to understand an adult's opinion, and he'll be an adult in a few years. He can decide things for himself. This was my last-ditch effort. Then my husband lashed out at me. Ever since he quit his job, he hasn't held a steady job. I had a lot going on, but you admitted to the affair, resigned voluntarily, and chose your current life. That was your decision, wasn't it, Sam? If we get divorced, this will have to be discussed with a lawyer, too. And if I don't pay your living expenses, Amanda won't be able to live either. My husband changed the subject. Let me be clear about this. You succeeded as a researcher, but you lost your family because of it. Seeing Amanda made me realize that children need a mother after all. You got carried away and ended up losing your family. Don't even think about trying to fix things now. Know your place. I wanted to cherish Ken too, you know. It's pointless to argue about this now. We both knew that. In the end, we decided to proceed with the divorce mediation through lawyers. I decided to agree to the discussions, determined to get custody of my son. My son is no longer a child who needs constant care, but he will need financial support, especially if he goes to college, which will require a large amount of educational expenses. There's no way that my currently unemployed husband and his mistress can adequately care for my son. Also, my husband has been having an affair for many years. My husband had asked me to put the claim for compensation for his infidelity on hold for the time being. I have the right to claim compensation from my husband for his infidelity. It would be absolutely impossible for him to pay in his current financial situation. I knew my husband was just trying to maintain the status quo. He had reluctantly started the divorce mediation because my son had told him to. I was suddenly asked if I could meet my son in person to talk. Your son, Ken, wants to talk to you directly, Mrs. Davis. I readily agreed. I was shown into the conference room. My son and the mistress were sitting there. The mistress had a stiff expression. In contrast, my son was smiling. He was probably amused that things were going his way. The divorce is going smoothly, right? I'll pay for living expenses and child support until I become an adult. Where are you planning to go to college? Don't worry about tuition. My son looked at his mistress. The mistress responded in kind way. There was an unusual atmosphere between them. Ever since he was in elementary school, my son had been very attached to the mistress. Any college Mom approves of is fine with me. Honestly, I don't really feel like going, though. My son was touching the mistress's hand affectionately. Even though the room was warm, I felt a chill run down my spine. As my husband had told me, my son was attached to the mistress. What kind of reaction would my son have if I separated him from the mistress? Ken, you're 14 years old now. Actually, there's something more important than the divorce proceedings with your father that I need to talk to you about." My son had a mischievous grin on his face. It seemed like he was up to something. "What is it? It's unusual for you to ask for my advice, Ken. You don't have to get divorced from Dad. Just keep sending us our living expenses. I don't want my current living environment to change, and more than anything, it'll interfere with my exam studies." He was the one who insisted on the divorce, wasn't he? "You're paying for our living expenses, child support, and tuition. If you do that, I have no complaints." What was I witnessing right now? My son and the mistress were acting like lovers. I want to live with Mom. If you guarantee my life with Mom, then don't get divorced. Dad's been stingy with the living expenses lately. I think he's jealous of me and Mom. Ken, your mother is here. Watch your words. I was at a loss for words. I managed to maintain my composure in that moment and casually ended the conversation. After that, I immediately confronted my husband about the strange relationship between my son and the mistress. He said he didn't know when it started, but he had noticed his son's strange behavior. After that, the divorce proceedings between my husband and me stalled. I was berating my husband about the matter with my son and the mistress. "What's going on? Why didn't you say anything? It's not like I could just tell you." And he insisted on getting a divorce. He said he only sees Amanda as a mother. I told myself it would be okay. I never thought he'd say something like that to you, Rachel. My son's rebellious phase was at its peak, and he wouldn't listen to my husband, who was, in effect, his stepfather. My son had been bringing the mistress into his room. My husband had witnessed this and was perplexed. He said he had also warned the mistress not to enter his son's room, but the mistress insisted that my son was still a child and wouldn't stop going into his room. This is a mess. Amanda has been at our house this whole time. Sam might be treated as a nuisance by now. He might get kicked out just like I did. 3 years had passed since then. My son visited my apartment. "It's unusual for you to come to my apartment, Ken. I'm in high school now, and I'm trying to think and act more responsibly." Could it be about Amanda? My son looked away awkwardly. "I've been acting so rebellious all this time. I know you'll be dumbfounded no matter what I say now, Mom, but I didn't have anyone else to talk to." I offered my son a cup of coffee. "I'm seriously considering marrying Mom. I've always treated her like a stepmother, but I can't suppress my feelings of love for her anymore. Honestly, I only felt disgust for the mistress. If I had been there, I would have slapped her. I never expected that the reinvestigation of my husband's affair would come in handy at a time like this." I let out a sigh. "But I don't think Dad will approve of our relationship." "Of course not. You've been acting like she's your mother this whole time, and he's been watching you. And suddenly your relationship changes? Besides, Amanda is your father's girlfriend." A few days later, a letter arrived in the mailbox. Normally, it would only contain junk mail. I was so surprised that I checked the address multiple times. The address was correct. The sender was my husband. It was sent by express mail, so it must have been urgent. I hurriedly opened the envelope. Right there. Green lines and characters. I thought I might be seeing things, and I traced the written characters with my fingers over and over again. It was, without a doubt, a divorce registration form with his intent to divorce. My hands wouldn't stop shaking from the shock. I hurriedly called my husband. "Hello, what's going on? Why would you send me a divorce registration form? We haven't finished our discussion yet." "It's just as it looks. I don't need living expenses or child support anymore, so let's officially get a divorce. You can file it right away." My husband's attitude was extremely dismissive. "Wait, have you told Ken about the divorce?" My husband was flustered, but towards me he was cold and indifferent. He's already attached to Amanda. He's probably already heard. "Once we're divorced, I'm going to register my marriage with Amanda right away, so please file it as soon as possible. I can give you custody of Ken, but consider Ken's feelings and act accordingly. Understand that he may not want to see his biological mother." "Are you drunk or something?" "Hey Ken, I'm talking to your mom right now." "I sent the divorce papers by express mail, just like you asked." My husband must have pressed the speaker button because I could hear my son's voice. "It's about time, Mom," my son's listless voice. And behind him, I could also hear the mistress's voice. "Oh, Sam, it's a problem between a husband and wife. Don't involve Ken." My husband had become completely self-destructive. "You heard her. There's no need for any more discussion. I'll leave the paperwork to you." "Okay then, I'll take care of the rest." My husband seemed satisfied with my answer. After hanging up the phone, I laughed out loud. Ever since I found out about my husband's affair, about 7 years ago, I have been living like this. I was also getting tired of dealing with family problems. That's precisely why it was my true feeling. Finally, it was finally over. I have been living with my true feelings hidden for so long. I can finally be free from my family. I shouted that in my heart. I quickly filled out the divorce registration form. I'll submit it first thing tomorrow morning, and I decided to reevaluate my life up until now. After the divorce was finalized, I informed my ex-husband. My married life ended. I then applied for paid leave and took care of the post-divorce procedures. I started the process of selling the house registered in my name. I had given up everything. There's no need for property division, but even if I sell the house, will the wounds in my heart heal? That house was filled with so many memories. It was taken over by the mistress. Then let's just level it. I signed a contract with the real estate agent to have it demolished if it didn't sell within 3 months. This finally made me realize that I had lost my family. However, 3 months later, I received a call from my ex-husband. I was bewildered by how flustered he seemed. He said that the mistress had disappeared and he was in trouble. What do you mean? You said you were going to register your marriage with her right away. Amanda refused. I had a bad feeling about this. I hurriedly got a copy of the family register. My son had removed himself from the family register on his 18th birthday, 1 month before our divorce. My son had eloped with the mistress. It was probably triggered by my ex-husband's rash actions. That's the worst possible outcome. He's an adult now, and I want to respect his decisions. That's what I like to say, but he's still a student. I hung up with my ex-husband, and I called my son's high school. He had completed the procedures to withdraw from school more than 6 months ago. When he visited the school to complete the paperwork, the mistress had accompanied him as his guardian. Because of that, the teachers assumed that his parents had agreed, and they processed his withdrawal. I told my ex-husband about this. My ex-husband was more angry about being robbed of the mistress than he was worried about his son's safety, and he realized that he had been abandoned by both his son and his mistress. It's your fault. Because of you, Ken did this. While he was having an affair, he was still relying on my living expenses. The true nature of such a terrible man was revealed. I sighed deeply. It's mainly because you were having an affair with Amanda and bringing her home, isn't it? It's not right to take it out on me. My ex-husband had lost both his son and his mistress and was desperately clinging to me. Rachel, please, you have to do something. Ken is your son too. Ken is 18 now. He can make his own decisions. Besides, didn't he cut ties with us? That's why he removed himself from the family register, right? That's not the point. I've been robbed of my woman. My ex-husband was completely insane with jealousy. He had always been the one having affairs, so he probably had no tolerance for being the one left behind. Forget about Amanda and your son. More importantly, what are you going to do now? My ex-husband had quit his job and was planning to take over the mistress's family business. Now that his plans had fallen through, it wouldn't be surprising if he was in a state of despair. And the living expenses I have been paying for my son, I'm stopping payments this month. What should I do? First, get your own life together. Isn't that the priority? You need to find a job. The mistress's... It turns out my ex-husband believed the mistress's lies. So I decided to tell my ex-husband everything. Just so you know, Amanda's family doesn't have a business. I looked into it with a private investigator. I sent all the data on the mistress's background check to my ex-husband's phone. The mistress's family consisted of her mother, who lived in an apartment. Her mother was a part-time worker living alone. She had grown tired of her daughter, who didn't hold a steady job. Furthermore, she found out that her daughter's boyfriend was a married man. This led to an argument, and the mistress was kicked out of her family home. They have been estranged since. Around that time, my ex-husband and I separated, and as a result, the mistress started to hang around our house. This is the truth about Amanda. She lied to us to get us to divorce Sam. But I never imagined it would end up like this. My ex-husband was confronted with reality. He was at a loss for words in despair. It seems she thought she could live off your income, Sam. But since you quit your job, she left with Ken, didn't she? The words that finally came out of my ex-husband's mouth were, "Then that's just a marriage scam. I was deceived. What did I think I was doing, quitting my job?" "You were having an affair the whole time, Sam. You have no right to say that." I was dumbfounded and couldn't say anything more. More importantly, I gave my ex-husband some advice on how he could live on his own from now on. "I'm going to stop sending you living expenses this month, so find a job soon and get your life together. Got it?" But my ex-husband seemed unenthusiastic, having gotten used to life as a stay-at-home dad and an unemployed freeloader. But now that the divorce was finalized and our son was independent, I had no intention of paying for my ex-husband's living expenses. I haven't forgiven him for his decades of infidelity. My ex-husband was completely despondent after being betrayed by his son and his mistress. It was probably the karma for what he had done to me all these years. 2 months later, my ex-husband contacted me again. I thought he had finally found a job, but I was wrong. Hey Rachel, what's going on? I got an eviction notice. I'll be in trouble if I don't have a place to live now. In trouble? We're divorced. We talked about this so much. How could you not remember? I thought Amanda's family was well off. I thought it would be okay to give up my assets. My ex-husband made a feeble excuse. But a deal is a deal. In the end, the house was demolished as promised since there were no buyers, and the land was returned to its original state. A for sale sign was put up on the empty lot. The house, which contained more memories with the mistress than with my family and me, was demolished, and I felt a sense of relief. In the end, my ex-husband went back to his parents' house under the pretense of job hunting and is somehow scraping by. I've had some time to reflect. I was really a selfish and terrible guy. It's too late for regrets now. My ex-husband seems to be worn out from job hunting. I never dreamed that we would be regularly contacting each other after the divorce. The reason we were in contact was because of our son, who had disappeared with a mistress. Our son is still out of contact. I asked a private investigator to search for him, but it seems he's living in a way that makes it difficult to track him. One day I received a call saying that my son had been taken into police custody. My ex-husband, who had rushed to the police station before me, had already gotten the details from our son. He was quite agitated and looked like he was about to hit our son. I treated you like my own son, and you were attached to Amanda like she was your real mother, weren't you? My hunch was spot on. My son had eloped with the mistress. My ex-husband understood that. But when he heard the truth from his son's own mouth, it seemed he couldn't contain his anger. My son sat slumped in a chair in the police station's waiting room, glancing at me sideways. But my ex-husband, not noticing, continued his lecture. Why did you betray me? Why were you living with Amanda? Why did you leave without saying anything? I'm your father. My ex-husband was crying as he yelled. Then he met my eyes. My son scoffed. Can you say the same thing in front of Mom? You've been cheating on Mom this whole time. You're not in a position to blame me. You're the one who's been betraying us all along, Dad. You. I provided you with a proper home. My ex-husband noticed my presence at the end of his son's gaze. My ex-husband stopped talking mid-sentence. My ex-husband's eyes, as he looked at me, were weak. He had the look of someone with a guilty conscience. I spoke to the two of them. That's true. You're not in a position to blame Ken, Sam. Honestly, I felt a sense of satisfaction. My ex-husband had never shown any remorse during the divorce proceedings. I also had a sense of guilt about neglecting Ken's upbringing, so I couldn't strongly blame my ex-husband. See? Even Mom says so. Because Dad is a cheater. You. Have some shame. Mom looks like she's... My ex-husband yelled loudly and tried to lecture his son. Several police officers intervened to stop him. I bowed my head and asked the police for the details. The reason my son was taken into custody was because of a domestic dispute with his mistress, which led to a call to the police. It seemed they had a fight over something trivial at the apartment they were sharing. The argument escalated with yelling, which caused the neighbor to call the police. The police seemed exasperated by my son, and his mistress promised the police and my ex-husband that they would no longer have any contact with each other. However, it was highly unlikely that the relationship between my son and my ex-husband could ever be repaired. I was exasperated and let out a sigh. Then my son spoke to my ex-husband. I'm going home, so you should leave. My ex-husband scoffed at his son's words. It's too bad for you. Your home doesn't exist anymore. Rachel sold the house and the land. I was kicked out too, and I was at a loss, but I have my parents' house to go back to. He showed my son a picture of the empty lot with a for sale sign. My son seemed surprised when he saw it. But then he turned his gaze towards me. I sighed and explained to my son. When your dad sent me the divorce papers, he gave up his claim to our assets. The house was in my name, so I sold it at that time. I don't plan on returning to our hometown from my lab in New York City, so I didn't need the house. Having broken up with his mistress, my son was pale, having nowhere to go. My ex-husband seemed triumphant. They really are two peas in a pod. Ken, you're independent now, no matter what happened. I'm your son, aren't I? Yes, but you're the one who cut ties with us, Ken. Afterwards, I borrowed a room at the police station and talked to my son. I had his mistress sit in on the conversation. Even if he completely cut ties with his mistress, I couldn't imagine my ex-husband forgiving my son. Naturally, there was no place for my son at my ex-husband's parents' house either. I won't ask what happened between you and Amanda, but please consider your father's feelings. I was also cheated on by your father for a long time. It was not a pleasant feeling. Your father isn't mature enough to easily forgive such a betrayal. The mistress averted her eyes from my son. Ever since she was having an affair with my ex-husband, she had always been brazen with me, but she seemed to feel guilty about laying a hand on the son she had raised as her own. In the end, I promised to support my son until he could become financially independent, and the mistress left the police station as if she were running away. My family broke apart in the worst way possible, but I decided to believe that this was for the best. A year later, I remarried a man who had recently transferred to my lab. Things progressed so quickly, it felt like the bad luck had just been lifted from me. My current husband has a son from a previous marriage, and I can't help but see my own son in him. His son basically lives on his own, but my current husband and his ex-wife have an amicable relationship, so his son goes back and forth between their homes. He plans to graduate from graduate school next year and start working. While having dinner with my current husband and his son, I ran into my son by chance. He was working as a waiter, and he looked surprised to see me, my current husband and his son, but he quickly composed himself and started serving us professionally. When we were finishing our meal, I told the two of them, "I'm sorry, but I have something I need to do." I had them go home ahead of me. I contacted my son on my phone. "I want to meet after your shift." I sent him a message on a messaging app. My son came outside the restaurant right away. "It's been a while, Ken." "Mom, you remarried. I'm glad you're happy." I met someone really nice soon after. I never thought I would be able to remarry. My son now has multiple part-time jobs. He's now living on his own and is somehow managing to live without my financial support. I managed to make amends with my ex-husband, but they don't keep in touch much. Give me a call sometime, and when you have time, come visit me directly. You're my son, so you should feel comfortable greeting my new family. Thanks, Mom. I feel really embarrassed about my behavior until now. I hugged my reformed son. It seemed like his bad luck had been lifted too. A year after that, my current husband's son graduated from graduate school. He successfully got a job at the company he wanted. After his son became independent, my current husband and I have been devoting ourselves to our research. I never imagined I would be able to live such a peaceful life. There are times when I think that things might have been different if I had paid more attention to my family during my life with my ex-husband. But the past is in the past. I just pray that I can live happily with my new family for as long as possible.